Hello everyone, my name is Caomhan. I've been in GMIT for the last 3 years now, and my whole area of study is on concussion education, concussion awareness, knowledge and attitudes towards concussion. So over the last few years, I've worked with coaches, parents, an understanding of knowledge of their attitude. The reason for this is because you can use knowledge and attitudes to predict real world behaviours and hopefully be able to tools going forward. What I mean by that is a person's ability to recognise signs and symptoms of a concussion, their ability to recognise how concussions occur, and as well as that, their ability to understand the recovery process of concussion. And then by concussion attitudes, this is how someone might react in a real world incidence of concussion occurring. So one of the questions that we might use for getting a measure of concussion attitudes with an athlete might be something like asking them how they would react, or if they had symptoms of a concussion like a headache and dizziness, and while they're still on the pitch, would they remain in play, would they remove themselves from play, or what decision would they make? And so here's just a quick overview of the work I've completed to date in GMIT. I'm going to briefly talk about the literature review and the animated video that we put together here, and then I'll talk a little bit more in depth about the focus groups, questionnaire and workshop. So I just want to kind of give a picture of what concussion is like in Ireland at the minute, what the knowledge levels are like, what the attitude levels are like in Ireland. So really briefly with the systematic literature review, I was examining studies that were testing the effectiveness of existing concussion educational programs and tools. So our initial searches, we had over 7,000 papers, and then we systematically brought this down to 25 studies that we included. So we found 25 studies that met our own criteria for educational materials. And the reason why we wanted to examine what these different studies looked at is so we could make our own educational tools going forward. And what we found is that the existing literature is very good at improving knowledge immediately post their interventions and long-term up to 6 months after their interventions. And then when it comes to attitudes, they're very good at increasing attitudes immediately post the interventions were carried out, but then they weren't very good at maintaining those higher levels of concussion attitudes after the increases from baseline. Other things we found as well is that these educational tools were mainly focused on athletes only. So other key decision makers in sport were really overlooked. There's not a whole lot of research on educational tools for coaches, for parents, for teachers. So that's something that we thought could do with being addressed. And then I'm going to move on to the animated video. So from the systematic literature review, we also found that there's a need and a place for accessible concussion educational tools. And we decided to go with this and to make our own accessible educational tool in the form of an animated video. So we have a few stills from the video up here on the screen. And then we put this video out and we got results back, got to see if it improved knowledge and attitudes. And we found that it increased both of them in the short term, but we don't have any long-term information to say if it's effective or not. But the positive thing about this is that the video is only 4.5 minutes long. You can watch it on your phone. So it could be implemented at key time points during a sports season. So if it's in pre-season or before an important run of games, so you can maintain your levels of concussion knowledge and attitudes that you on the video, and they felt that the time to watch the video was just right. So 86% of the people who watched the video felt that. And we also watched if people would be willing to rewatch the video again to maintain their gained knowledge and attitudes towards concussion. So 83% of participants were willing to rewatch the video, with only 2.3% saying that it wouldn't be worth their time again to watch. So again, this kind of, even though we don't know the long-term effects of the video, we found that most people would be willing to rewatch it to maintain higher levels of knowledge and attitudes. And you can find the video by going into YouTube and typing in "heads up concussion video," and it's the first result that's returned. We then went on to carry out questionnaires and focus groups with athletes, with coaches and parents across Ireland. So again, this is so we can design specific interventions for specific groups in Ireland, because different groups of people will have different needs. Our questionnaire, it managed to get out to just under 500 individuals, and it was a fairly even spread across the three groups. Everyone that filled it out was over the age of 18 and had some active involvement in sport in Ireland. So our main findings from the questionnaire was that coaches had the best knowledge of concussions. We also found out, it's supporting what a lot of us already probably feel, is that athletes showed the worst attitudes towards concussions, or the most dangerous attitudes towards concussions. So we also found out as well that attitudes tend to increase with age. So as you get older, your attitudes will improve. And we came up with a few recommendations from this questionnaire. So the first one is that our pitch side decision makers should be the ones deciding whether an athlete stays or is removed from the pitch. It should never, ever be left up to the athlete to decide to be removed from the pitch or to decide to stay on the pitch. Athletes tend to put the importance of the match ahead of their own welfare and will want to stay on the match with sort of a win at all costs mentality. So the second recommendation goes in line with that, that coaches and parents should be provided with more materials to actually make these pitch side decisions and to decide to bring the athletes off the pitch. So separate to the questionnaire, then we ran focus groups to kind of give us a more detailed, detailed aspect or detailed view of coaches, athletes and parents' knowledge and attitudes towards concussion. So we ran 4 separate focus groups. We ran one with coaches, one with athletes, 2 with athletes, so one with female athletes, one with male athletes, and then we ran one with our parents as well. And our main findings from this is that people find it really, really difficult to recognize a concussion when it actually happens. And even when they do recognize it, people don't know what they're meant to do. So they don't know, am I meant to remove this player from the pitch? Is this player allowed to return? How long are they meant to stay off the pitch? It's not common knowledge to the people that took part. We also found out from athletes that they're willing to put their own will to win ahead of their own safety and the safety of their teammates. So here's a quote from one of our athletes that took part in our focus groups. So if it's a case where it's a key player who they might need for the next week or the week after that, I think it's the right decision to take them off the pitch. If it's a case that it's a big match, I think I might have a different answer for that. So this athlete was talking about some of their own teammates in a rugby situation where if it's not really an important match, it's okay for the player to come off the pitch. But if it's a semi-final or a final, I'd be willing to put that person's health at risk for the sake of winning a match. And these are the kind of dangerous attitudes that we want to highlight from athletes and why it's important for coaches and parents to come forward and to take that decision out of their hands. From a coach's perspective, coaches discuss an awful lot about how they just don't know what to do, even if you have an athlete who is really honest with you, will let you know if they're injured and will let you know how they're feeling. They just don't know how to actually spot a concussion. So we have supporting quotes from that as well. So even when you have a player who does share how they're feeling and not complaining straight away, how is a coach meant to recognize that? And then in our parent focus groups, they were talking about kind of the culture of Irish sports and that win at all costs mentality. And we have a quote here. So in the GAA, there's kind of a you'll be grand attitude about it. A lot of careers have been ended because of concussions, possibly because a player comes back too early. So we use all this information from our systematic review, our questionnaire, our focus groups, and it was really heavily influenced as well by output 2 from the SCAT group to develop a workshop. And we went out to secondary schools across Connacht and Munster. So we developed an hour-long workshop to try and improve attitudes and knowledge in the hope of improving actual behaviour towards concussion. So we made it out to 9 schools in total and got to over 600 transition year students. And as part of this workshop, we recorded baseline data as well to figure out who's actually suffering from concussions in Ireland. So from the total 600 students that were taking part in the workshop, 20.1% of them have previously suffered from at least one concussion in the past. And this isn't just students that are involved in sport, this is entire transition year groups. So this is a really broad, wide-ranging group of students. Some of them don't play sport at all. Some of them are multi-sport athletes. Scarier than that again, 6% of students that took part in the workshops had suffered 2 or more concussions. And worryingly, only 2.1% have actually had any sort of concussion training or concussion education in the past. So if you can compare those numbers again, that's 1 in 50 have had some sort of concussion education in the past, but 1 in 5 have previously suffered from a concussion. So there's a real gap there that needs to be bridged. We also found that sports participation is one of the biggest indications of whether or not someone is going to suffer from a concussion. So that 11.1% there represents participants that don't take part in any sport at all. So 11.1% of students that don't take part in sport have suffered from a concussion. Compare that to students who take part in one sport, 18.5% have suffered from a concussion. And then students who take part in 2 sports, 26% have suffered from a concussion. And then students who take part in 3 or more sports, 34.1% of these students have previously suffered from a concussion. It's kind of worrying for us because there's an awful lot of multi-sport athletes in Ireland. It's really common for, let's say, a 15-year-old to go out and have Gaelic football training on a Monday evening and a Wednesday evening, then hurling training on a Tuesday and a Thursday. They'll play a soccer match on Saturday and then a Gaelic football match on a Sunday. So there are so many multi-sport athletes in Ireland, and these numbers are really worrying. Again, we're not saying the solution is to stop playing sport. We don't want to tell anyone to stop playing sport, but the solution is to try and bring up this number here of the students that are actually being exposed to concussion educational materials. And then for some individual sports, we have some data on the number of students that have suffered from concussions. So of the students taking part in Gaelic football, 31% of them have previously suffered from a concussion, and 25.2% of people playing hurling on Caomhan have previously suffered from it. But then when you look at our multi-sport athletes, this number goes up again. So participants playing both Gaelic football and hurling, it's 2 out of every 5 have previously suffered from a concussion. And bear in mind that these are 15, 16-year-olds. These aren't people that have been playing for 20 plus years in their lives. They're young adolescents. And then we can compare those to the numbers seen in rugby and soccer. Then for the total population that took part, again, bearing in mind this isn't just people playing rugby. I know it was highlighted earlier that the incidence in rugby for females is higher than males. But we found that in this group of adolescents, 24% of males have previously suffered from a concussion compared to 15.5% of females. But the reason why this difference exists is that more males are actively involved in sport than females. So they have more exposures to concussion than females, and that's a separate issue altogether. So females that are involved in sports had similar rates of concussions compared to males that are involved in sports. Then we just have a few take-home messages before I finish up here. So concussion education is key to improving behaviours. So I suppose a big thank you to everyone for coming today to this to improve your own knowledge on concussion, and you're helping with creating a safer environment for athletes going forward. It's really important to take the decision out of the athlete's hands. So you don't want to leave an athlete who only wants to win. You don't want to give them the decision to remain on a pitch. The coach or the parent on the sideline should be the one saying, this person should be taken off the pitch, they shouldn't be playing anymore. And then finally, concussions happen across all sports and recreational activities. It's not just a boxing issue, it's not just a rugby issue, it's a sporting issue, it's any sort of a recreational activity, it can be an issue there. Okay, so that's everything for me. Thank you very much.